Following the humiliating defeat at Caudine Forks, there was a 5-year peace between the Romans and the Samnites. Ancient sources claim that during this peace, in 318 BCE, the cities of Apulia voluntarily surrendered to Rome, but this date is unclear. When the peace was finally broken in 316 BCE, the Romans sent out multiple armies in different directions. The first consul, Lucius Papirius Cursor, was sent to besiege the Samnites who captured Luceria. The second consul, Quintus Publilius Philo, was sent to besiege Saticula in Campania. And finally, the dictator Fabius Rullianus was sent to Satricum to deal with rebelling Volscians. This splitting of the forces would prove disastrous for the Romans. When the dictator recovered Satricum, he received a report of a large Samnite army heading towards Latium. Ancient sources didn't name the commander of this army, but some modern historians speculate it was led by none other than Gaius Pontius. It's unclear if he defeated Philo in battle or simply outmaneuvered him, but nevertheless he had a clear path to the undefended Latin cities. Rullianus was now the only general close enough to intervene. He decided to split his force in two. He would guard the inland path to Rome himself, while his master of the horse Quintus Aulius would guard the coastal path. Samnites decided to go south in order to split Rome from their Greek allies. They met Aulius in the Battle of Lautuli near Terracina. Aulius commanded a force of fresh recruits, and his army was no match for the battle-hardened Samnites. The army was completely destroyed and Quintus Aulius was killed. The Roman forces were in shambles and the Samnite army roamed free. They convinced Auruncans and Campanians to rebel against their overlords. Fabius Rullianus was doing all he could to protect the roads leading directly to Rome. Although his efforts were successful and the attack on Rome was avoided, this left many cities undefended and they fell to the Samnite forces. These events left Rome in a precarious position, and his fate would have been sealed if not for the reorganization of the army during the Caudine peace. In the 5 years following the battle, the Romans adopted the Samnite 3-line manipul system. They also introduced a system of trained reserves that gave them quick access to a large number of troops after a crushing defeat. This meant that the force besieging Luceria didn't have to be recalled, which would prove crucial and turn the tide of this war. In 314 BCE, a Spartan general leading a mercenary army landed in Tarentum. His primary goal was to aid the Greeks in their struggle against the tyrant Agathocles of Syracuse, but nothing was stopping him from roaming the Italian countryside. Although his foray into Italy would be short-lived, Samnites had no way of knowing that and had to act. If this army combined with the Romans in Apulia, they would pose a significant threat. Samnites had to redirect part of their force from Latium to the east. This left the general outnumbered in hostile lands. Combined Roman armies numbering 4 legions engaged the Samnites near Terracina and dealt them a crushing blow. Having dealt with the Samnite threat, the Romans marched their armies south and crushed the revolt. They had no mercy for the rebels, and Auruncans were eradicated. Next year, the Romans recaptured all lost territory in Latium and subdued the rebels in Campania. Now Rome was on the offensive and armies started making forays into Samnite territory. Fearing the sudden revival of the Roman legions, the Etruscans allied with the Samnites and declared a sudden war. It's unclear why the Etruscans didn't attack Rome while it was on its knees, but rather waited for legions to recover. Some modern historians speculate that this was due to a friendly relationship between Rome and Carthage at the time. We should also note that the Etruscans were not completely united. Cities of northern Etruria had no interest in fighting a costly war against faraway Rome. Nevertheless, this declaration of war was not taken lightly in Rome. Roman forces were again spread thin and panic ensued in the city. During this crisis, a dictator was nominated and all of the fighting-age men were ordered to take up arms. We should now take a break from Roman foreign affairs and examine events that perspired at home. In 312 BC, Appius Claudius, a descendant of the famous Appius Claudius who led the Decemvirs in writing the 12 tables, was elected as one of the 2 censors. The main duty of the censor was deciding who could vote in Roman elections and who could serve in the Senate. According to customs, the censors will just reaffirm last year's lists, but Appius decided to break with customs and stacked both the Senate and the voting blocks with men loyal to him. Appalled by his actions, the second censor stepped down, believing this would stop Appius. According to the sacred laws, if one of the censors couldn't perform his duties anymore, the second would step down and 2 new censors would be elected. But once more he disregarded tradition and held the office anyway. It is said that he proceeded to act against a family he disliked, taking their sacred rights and giving them to temple servants. For these actions, the gods punished him with blindness, and he earned the nickname Cecus, meaning the blind. Although this account doesn't hold up with other sources that don't mention his blindness until much later in his life. After filling the Senate with loyal men and dealing with rival families, he started work on his ultimate project. During the First Samnite War, a need for a road connecting Rome and Campania was apparent. Although victorious, the Romans constantly had problems with maneuvering their troops from north to south and with supplying those troops once deployed. Considering the Romans had their hands full, first with the Latin War and then with the outbreak of the Second Samnite War, the resources needed to construct this road could not be spared. But now the time was ripe, and Appius started construction on this road that would later bear his name, Via Appia. The first section of this road passed through the Pontine marshes and connected Rome to Capua. Eventually, this road would be extended all the way to Brundisium in the south of Italy. Appius then constructed the first Roman aqueduct, which would also bear his name, Aqua Appia. Having finished the road, the troops could now easily pass between the northern and southern parts of the Republic. They didn't have to trek through the malaria-infested marshes or take the perilous coastal roads anymore. This allowed them to quickly end the Samnite Wars and later conquer all of Italy. With this road, the Romans would recognize the importance of logistics, which would play a big part in later expansions out of Italy. Appius Claudius held on to the office of censor for 5 consecutive years, which was unheard of at the time. During this time, he extended the voting rights to landless citizens. This and his other generous policies endeared him to the masses, and his blatant abuse of power was ignored. After finally stepping down from his post as censor, he would go on to serve as consul twice and dictator once. In his later career, he would be known for opposing Pyrrhus of Epirus during his invasion, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. After 311 BCE, when hostilities with the Etruscans started, Romans fielded 2 completely separate armies. One was dealing with the Samnites in the south, while the other was dealing with the Etruscans in the north. It speaks volumes that Rome was able to not only keep both fronts active at the same time, but actually emerge victorious on both sides. In 310 BCE, Quintus Fabius Rullianus, who was master of the horse only a few years prior, was elected consul. He led one of the armies north to attack the Etruscan army that was besieging Sutrium. The Etruscans were easily defeated and most of the men ran into the Ciminian forest. This forest was the stuff of legends, and it's said that until that point not a single Roman dared to enter it. Livy even compares it to the dreaded German forests that were feared throughout the whole empire in his time. Nevertheless, Fabius decided to follow the Etruscans in order to crush the whole army. While the army was deep inside the forest, the other consul, Marcius Rutilus, invaded Samnium. The Samnites met him near Aliphae, and an indecisive battle was fought. A large number of high-ranking Romans were killed, and the consul himself was wounded. When the Senate caught wind of these events, they panicked and nominated Papirius Cursor dictator, who then raised another army. It is then that Fabius emerged from the Samnian forest. He not only defeated a large Etruscan army and forced a peace treaty on towns in northern Etruria, but also secured an alliance with the Umbrians. He was shocked to learn that his command was given to the man who wanted to execute him only a few years ago, but he put aside his personal grievances and submitted to the dictator. Papirius combined the 2 armies and marched south to deal with the Samnites. Livy mentions that the 4 greatest generals of that generation were all present on the battlefield. Papirius Cursor as the dictator, Marcus Valerius Corvus on the right flank, Publius Decius Mus on the left flank, and Junius Bobulcus, who we haven't yet mentioned, but who was an important figure during the Second Samnite War as the master of the horse. Together they dealt a crushing blow to the Samnites. After this battle, the war changed into a series of small border skirmishes that would last for another 6 years. In 310 BCE, the Romans also dealt with the Etruscans in the Battle of Lake Vadimo. Not much is known about this battle, but it's believed that it was the largest fought between the 2 nations. The battle was an astounding Roman victory, and the power of the Etruscans, who for so long dominated northern Italy, was destroyed. They would never again pose a significant threat to Rome. The Samnites were a mountain people, and they didn't have many large population centers that Romans could attack. Instead, they had to capture territory bit by little bit, secure it, and move on to a new patch of land. The constant skirmishes around Samnium were going in Roman favor. They could not score a major victory, but each year the Samnite resolve was waning. Finally, in 305 BCE, combined armies of 2 consuls defeated a large Samnite army and captured Bovianum, the Samnite capital. Exhausted by the war, the Samnites sued for peace the very next year. After they surrendered, many bordering tribes pleaded their allegiance to Rome. This included Marsi, Peligni, Marrucini, Frentani, and later Vestini. Equi and Herniki were almost completely destroyed for their part in the Second Samnite War. As we have stated in the last video, the Roman ambitions of an empire emerged during the 4th century BCE, but they were about to kick into high gear. In ancient warfare, the number of men was generally far more important than the tactics, equipment, and the skill of those men. According to some sources, by the end of the 4th century BCE, the Romans had access to up to 500,000 troops. Comparing that to the relatively modest number of 50,000 men Alexander used to conquer the known world, or the force of 100,000 Persians who invaded Greece, we can see what made the legions unstoppable. These astronomical numbers come mostly from the large number of conquered people. Although the maps show the Romans controlling vast swaths of territory, these peoples were mostly self-governing. The Romans avoided directly managing their allies. Instead, they had only one obligation: to provide fighting men when called upon. Although this web of alliances provided Rome with the manpower needed for this aggressive expansion, it's unclear what caused this shift in perspective. Perhaps the scars of the Gallic sack were so deep that the Romans vowed to never again allow something similar to happen. Perhaps the Romans saw themselves as superior to everyone and only took their God-given rights. Or perhaps it was some other reason we will never know. On the other hand, the conflict of the orders did a lot more in Rome than simply ending the discrimination of the plebs. It transferred the governing power from those who were born into it, namely the patricians, to those who earned it through their deeds and accomplishments. Of these, military victories were the most highly praised, so perhaps it was the ambitious men chasing fame and glory who inadvertently expanded Rome's borders. The Samnites were now utterly defeated, and it was only a matter of time before they succumbed to the Roman conquest. In a last-ditch effort, they allied with the Etruscans and the Gauls to try and fight off the Romans. Join us next time as we discuss the third and the last Samnite War.